You are tuned into The Art of Software with Martin Lacey. To connect with the show today, you may call into 1-866-472-5790. Again, that's 1-866-472-5790. If you'd prefer to send an email, you may send it to m.lacey@laceytechnology.com. Now, back to The Art of Software.
Welcome back to the show. I'm speaking with Piers Hollett from Sierra Systems today, and we're going over the do's and don'ts in software and how you can avoid some of the more catastrophic failures that occur or have occurred in the industry. We've talked briefly about a couple of spectacular issues. What I want to get into now, and we can come back and talk as a need be, of things that are in the news, like the Equifax bug and things like that. But what I want to move forward on now is to talk about the project, the software project itself, and how that comes to be, how you manage scope, how you keep things contained so that although software can be very very complex, you need to boil it down when you on a project by project basis to modules and to routines and to nuggets of what actually needs to be done. So, Piers, what's your thoughts on managing scope and scope creep, as it's called?
Well, if we're talking about scope creep, when we're talking about complexity, this morning I saw this on the news. It comes across my feed. Amazon's Alexa is randomly laughing at people. The company is trying to fix it. I think, this is awesome, right? Here's the thing. As systems and algorithms become more complex, and as the architecture around how different components work together, like for instance, big stock trading systems or airline reservation systems, these are high traffic, high mission critical systems. They become absolutely impossible to predict because you have so many inputs and you have so much complexity internally. On top of that, we start talking about, well, how can you add a little bit of machine learning or something like that to your business? Those are great discussions to have. But again, it separates you further and further from that idea that you can write down all of the requirements which define your business and then build a single application that's going to, like that monolithic approach, will steer you in some challenging directions because you may not be dealing with an artificial intelligence, but you're certainly dealing with something that you can't understand and you can't predict, and that's challenging. So you have to keep things as simple as you can. Sometimes stupid ships a product when clever wouldn't, and I've always fallen back on that because you're in a meeting, you say, well, that's a stupid way of making that work, but it's going to work.
But it works.
Okay, let's do that. Keep it simple. Now, I think if you're talking about scope creep comes up a lot. On the one hand, you do need to systematically cycle through gathering business requirements, elaborating them into use cases or user stories, depending on what methodology you're using, then building test cases and using these as the basis for any development that you do. That's just a given. But in a large program that spans multiple years, you also, like we said before, you can lose context. What you originally set out to do is different from what you actually did. You discover you have a problem, and then you discover a solution, and then you start to implement the solution, and you realize, oh, we actually built that solution 5 years ago. We've just forgotten that we had it. It's been moved out of scope. Let's just bring it back into scope. Wow, that works. That happens, right? It's functionality that was never used, so no one is sure how it works. So your initial gut feeling is, oh, we just need to build it new. Sometimes what you've already got is good enough. So that's one of the things that I find happens a lot in systems that have been around for longer.
Is the scope, you're tacking on scope from previous projects and it's already been accomplished?
Yeah, exactly. Or you're trying to you've invested in building something which has a bit more flexibility than you needed at the time, and it pays off when you need it later, and that's fantastic. Building in too much flexibility, there's a cost to that, right? So there's a balance. And maybe scope creep itself is an excuse, by key decision makers who didn't pay enough attention or didn't want to pay attention at the beginning of the project. Or maybe it's an excuse by developers or architects who didn't really understand the full problem they were trying to solve. They just wanted to start solving it. Or maybe it's an excuse by project managers who believe that we can change a deliverable without any impact to a project. And I see that sometimes, and sometimes I see myself being that. And
yes,
it takes a lot of integrity and courage to say, yeah, those are all important things. I see that there are some defects here that somebody thinks needs to be fixed, but what's the underlying problem? What's the root cause? What are we actually trying to do here? And let's face it, if we follow the simple project methodologies like waterfall or agile that are designed to prevent scope creep, none of these things should be an issue. But we don't follow them. We start off with the best of intentions, but again, to return to that people issue, we're only human, and we're too rigid to adopt and understand change. To sum it up in 2 words, change happens. So you have to ask yourself at the beginning of every project, how am I going to handle change?
And when we keep on talking about this in simplicity, something just keeps on ringing in my ear over and over again. And it's a basic principle that my father, as an engineer, he hit it home on me from when I was 10. And, because I have a tendency to, someone asks me the time, I'll build them a watch. And that's just the detailed nature of me. And of course, his comment back on that is always, and he comes from an engineering perspective. He's an electrical engineer. His term was the KISS principle.
Yeah,
keep
absolutely.
it simple. Just the KISS has 2 S's on it, but keep it simple, silly, or keep it simple, stupid. But it's just keep it simple. That's the crux of it, right?
Yeah, and this may sound like an odd analogy, but I find myself falling back on this. Okay, so I do product development, but I try and explain where things go wrong with scope creep using hair product as an analogy. So like I get a new jar of the stuff I put in my hair, pomade or texturizing putty or whatever, and I get this new jar and it's full, and I use a ton of it. And I style my hair. I've got the wave. I've got everything going on, and I'm super happy with that because I've got a new thing to go with. It's shiny, it's fun, and I can get creative with it. By the time I get to the bottom of that jar, I can pick out a millimeter of that stuff with a fingernail and get the effect that I want. So why wasn't I doing that at the start of the jar? Why am I not doing that at the start of a project? Because at the start of a project, you have unlimited time, you have unlimited budget, you don't, but it feels that way.
Yeah.
And you want to do all the things. It's exciting. And I think that's one of the places where waterfall takes a lot of things, business requirements gathering, etc., which are really, really important, front loads them, but those things are also kind of boring. And so people start to get creative and add scope in because they can, because it's easier to imagine a thing than it is to build a thing. And that's where when an agile software approach comes in and says, no, what you want to do is focus on that minimum viable product, figure out what that is, start building that, and then start adjusting how you are managing your development based on whether that minimum viable product turns out to be enough, too hard, too much. You can make those decisions, but you're deferring those decisions until you actually have the understanding to make good decisions, but also that initial excitement of having all the things and all the time in the world has started to fade a bit, and you've had a bit of a reality check. And that's one of the reasons that I like the ideas that come out of that the methodology around it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. As we started dabbling in Agile probably 15 years ago, just in 2000, when I was working for a financial company, and we were. I don't even think they had the term Agile at that point. We called it protocycling. And ever since I started following that kind of methodology, where you build functional bits that actually work, and it's a little prototype, and it doesn't do a lot, but what it does perfect.
Right.
And you can augment that and add wrinkles onto it as you go, and it allows the project to grow, and you're adding more capabilities onto it. So in that respect, I've come to love Agile, because it forces you to stay current and not allow the scope to creep, because that wild visioning is, you can talk about it in a meeting and immediately goes onto the backlog. It's not doable today. No, it's not. It's a great idea. Yes, it is. Okay, backlog it goes. Let's focus on what we can actually do today, this week, and we'll come over to those great ideas in the week that great idea can be done.
Right, and I've worked on projects which are very traditional, very waterfall, and I've worked on projects that are very high agility. And to be honest, both of those things, they're methodologies, but they're also mindsets. And I think that sharing that mindset around and giving developers and testers and managers the experience of what it feels to move a little bit quicker using Agile and to do things a little bit differently is a great experience. And to be honest, the most useful Agile software development concept for me is always going to be MVP. This idea that what could we ship if we needed to in half the time or a quarter of the time, and our customers would still be happy. And what I really fall back on a lot, because I am working on a more traditional waterfall project right now, is Moscow, which is an acronym which stands for must, should, could, and won't. So it's a way of prioritizing and narrowing down business requirements. And
I like that.
I find that once you determine what you absolutely must accomplish with an iteration, the other things, they're just less important, because you've made that decision that if I'm going to succeed or fail on one or two really important pieces, these are those pieces. And then you say, well, there are some other things which we should do. There are some things that we could do, but it'll take time. It'll take time away from the things which are really, really important. And it's kind of like a waterfall way of building that backlog and keeping that backlog relevant.
I think that's an awesome an acronym. I'm going to start using that myself. I think that's the takeaway from this segment for me, is that Moscow concept.
What I like about it most is I didn't make that up. The people that I'm working with, the stakeholders that I'm working with, adopted that. So it's an easy way for me to talk to them and say, yeah, but should, capital S, should we do that? Or must we do that? And it also comes out of a standards background where there's a lot of shalls and wills and must and won'ts. And I honestly think that we can talk about abstraction, but using really, really concrete language around things is super important, because there's no going back once you say, yes, we must do this. We're going to. It's going to happen.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for bringing these points up. They're really great points, Pierce. We're going to have our next break. We'll be back in about 2 minutes' time with Pierce Holland from Sierra Systems as we talk further into what's good, what's bad, what you should be doing to make sure projects succeed. Thanks very much, Pierce. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back shortly.